That's a thing. Virtually confirm whether they can see the agenda on the screen, please.
Yes, we can.
All right. Okay. Okay. Okay, can everybody hear? Okay, all right. Those attending virtually, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you all for your patience. We're going to go ahead and get started now. Welcome to the USIBWC Colorado River Citizens Forum public meeting held today at the Yuma Civic Center Lounge in Yuma, Arizona, and via Teams webinar and conference call. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Leslie Grijalva. I am the public affairs officer, one of the public affairs officers for the U.S. section of the International Boundary and Water Commission. I am based at IBWC headquarters in El Paso. Before we get started with the meeting, just a few quick items. If you have joined via Teams, you should be able to see the agenda projected on the screen right now. If you've called in via telephone or if you cannot see them on Teams for some reason, you can view the presentations on our agency webpage. You can grab a pen and I'll give the link and call-in number for that in just a minute. For courtesy to those attending virtually and to the speakers, we're going to go ahead and mute everybody while the speaker is presenting. If anybody signed up to speak during public comment, which we didn't have anybody sign up ahead of time, but for anybody that would like to comment during the public comment period, we'll go ahead and take comments at that time when we reach that part of the agenda. Okay. After you've connected to Teams, if you should have any questions, there's a little icon of a little circle with a chat or a comment symbol on the Teams link. You can use the chat feature to ask any questions. We will be monitoring the chat for anybody that submits any questions there. If Teams just isn't working for you, you always have the option of calling in and viewing the presentations on the webpage. It is posted on the webpage. We did make sure that that link was working about an hour ago. So the number for that is 872-240-1286, followed by, it's going to ask you for like a meeting code. It's 5047-74332 and the pound sign. The meeting ID is 270-111-707-803. You can go to the webpage to view the presentation. The link is on the webpage. It'll take you directly to the presentation link. So at this time, we did have Ms. Megan Scott, who will be co-chairing today's meeting. I'll go ahead and turn it over to her so that she could get us started.
All right, welcome everybody. We're going to start with introductions of our board. I'm Megan Scott. I am the co-chair along with Patrick O'Dowd for these meetings. And I am the assistant coordinator of the Yuma County Water Coalition and represent several irrigation issues in the area. Yeah. Okay, so moving on to the board.
Somebody else.
Well, this is Elston Gruball with Welton Mohawk Irrigation and Drainage District. Were you able to hear me?
Yes, Elston, we could hear you. Okay, Curtis Cloud, if you could unmute yourself, you will each need to unmute yourself when we call your name. So Curtis Cloud. Okay, Trina Hamby.
Speaking. This is Curtis Cloud.
Okay, thank you, Curtis. Trina Hamby. Okay, Africa Luna Carrasco. Brian McNeese.
This is Brian by phone.
Patrick O'Dowd.
I'm here.
Okay. I know Lowell Perry was unable to join us this evening, and then Tina Shields. Okay. If we could go ahead and go around the room, for those members of the public that are attending, and if you could just do a quick introduction, and why you're joining us today. Yeah, I can pass the mic.
Good afternoon. I'm Kerry Meister from Yuma, and I'm attending today as the chair of the Sierra Club Colorado River Task Force. Very interested in what's going on in Mexico with the river.
My name is Nancy Meister. I'm serving the president of the Human Society, interested in all things for. I am Jen Oswald. I'm the environmental director at the Supply Indian Tribe, and tribe is involved in restoration along the
Ron Kerman with Human Rights Irrigation and Drainage District. Pictures, please.
Jeremy McCall with the City of Yuma Utilities Department, and just a key participant on the river to this building.
Anna Morales, I'm the area operations manager for the USIBWC Yuma Field Office.
Yes, there's not that many people.
Okay, and then we can go ahead and shift to our online participants. If you could, well, let me try to maybe call you by name. I think that's the easiest.
We can.
Okay, so,
There's a number there. We don't know what that is.
okay, so I'll skip that one. You already heard from Curtis. Elizabeth. Who's with your
Mhm.
So Elizabeth Riva, Frank Fisher, and I'll just kind of run through so we know who's on. Jenny Torres, Matias Rosales, Michael Moreno, Lourdes Sanchez, John Sparks, Trina, I see that you're there. I'll mark you as here. And then was Trina the last one?
That's it.
Okay. Thank you all for joining us online as well. And now I'm going to turn it over to Frank Fisher, who is the Director of Public Affairs with the US IBWC.
Good afternoon, Colorado River Citizens Forum board members and guests, and a special welcome to Professor Flessa for agreeing to be our presenter today. Thank you, everyone, for your support of the International Boundary and Water Commission Colorado River Citizens Forum. And thank you, Leslie, for organizing this important meeting and flying out there. I send a warm welcome from Commissioner Heener, who unfortunately can't be with us today. We hope everyone will have a good time, learn a lot, and feel free to ask questions and share your knowledge. Finally, I would like to mention that we have hired a contractor to help us with these meetings. They're Rational 360, and they're working with us to try to make these meetings as successful and painless as possible. That being said, I'd like to share with everyone that we are video recording this meeting so we can post it on the US IBWC YouTube channel as the minutes. Again, thank you for participating in this meeting, and please reach out to the US IBWC Public Affairs Office if we can help with anything. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. At this time, I'm going to introduce our speaker for the evening, and that is Professor Carl Flesa. He is a professor of geosciences at the University of Arizona. And I got my paperwork, got me a seat, so just a second. So Dr. Carl Flesa received his undergraduate degree from Lafayette College, a small liberal arts college in Pennsylvania, and his PhD from Brown University. He joined the University of Arizona faculty in 1977, and his research interests include conservation biology, water policy, and paleontology. He and his students have been studying the Colorado River Delta since 1992. He coordinated scientific monitoring of the Cienega de Santa Clara during the 2010-2011 pilot run of the Yuma desalting plant. He also spent a year in Australia studying the Murray-Darling River system and Australia's water policy. And since 2014, he has helped coordinate scientific monitoring of the effects of environmental flows to the Colorado River Delta. And for fun, he enjoys travel, movies, and racing his sports car. And at this time, I'll turn it over to Professor Flesa.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. And thanks to Leslie and her IT support team for solving many, many problems that allow you to see the slides, but the issue was videos. So you're going to get to see the videos, which is terrific. Let me see if I get this right. Okay, let's take a look at the Colorado River Delta as to what it might have looked like, what it did look like before all upstream dams and diversions diverted water away from the Delta. This is one of the few photographs that I know of the Delta, and this is in particular in 1905. And this is from a location actually just a little bit south of San Luis Rio, Colorado. The main channel of the river had moved since this particular photograph was taken. But what you see here, and a couple of things to note here, are the enormous number and density of cottonwood trees. This is a photo in January, so they're not leafed out. But it really gives you some picture as to what things used to be like. And it's a vision perhaps for the future as well, or at least parts of the course of the river. Before I go too much further, I want to acknowledge the help of an awful lot of people. And I'm really not talking about my work here, but really trying to relate to you a lot of the work that an enormous number of people in the agencies have been involved with over the years, since 2013 at least, or 2012, I should say, in sort of efforts to restore the Colorado River Delta. And you see their logos up here. And it's a really interesting mix. First of all, of course, the International Boundary Water Commission, but then, of course, agencies within Mexico, federal agencies within the United States, academic institutions in Mexico, academic institutions in the United States, and environmental NGOs have been very instrumental in these efforts, as you'll see. The other point I want to make in this particular slide is to say that I am not speaking for the IBWC. I am not speaking for the Bureau of Reclamation. I'm not speaking for any of these environmental groups. I'm probably not even speaking for the University of Arizona, as a matter of fact. But really here I'm speaking as a scientist and as a citizen who's seen an awful lot of this stuff happening. And I just want to relay that to you. The other acknowledgement that I want to make has to do with the land, and the land acknowledgement of the custodians of the traditional custodians of the land, the Delta, are the Kokopah, principally the Kokopah, on both sides of the border, obviously. But remember, the border cuts down. And the other Native American group, the Tohono O'odham, on the eastern side of the Delta. So those are a couple of my acknowledgements. Okay, I want to take you back to March 2014. And some of you might have been there at this particular spot. You're looking at Morelos Dam on the downstream side of Morelos Dam, and some of the gates are open. We're not really disturbing those two little coots that are swimming there in the water at all. But nevertheless, this is really a significant event. But there's a background to this that I want to go to. Oh, yeah. And whenever you have a major event like this, you've got to have a gathering. You've got to have speeches. Lots and lots of speeches. Okay, but in Spanish, in English, but speeches, and we're really commemorating this, what's come to be called the 2014 Pulse Flow. And this particular gathering and this particular event can be said to be really a celebration of binational trust. And that sort of keeps things going. That's a really important ingredient in the binational effort to restore sections of the Colorado River Delta. The background here, of course, will take us back to 2010 with the addition to the U.S.-Mexico Water Treaty of minute 318. If you remember 2010, the earthquake, 318 allowed Mexico to store water it could not utilize because of the earthquake in Lake Mead. This is a breakthrough. And that really formed the foundation of minute 319, a 5-year minute, if you will. And 319 went up to 2016. And US and Mexico agreed to share any future shortages, share any future surpluses. The US agreed to pay for water saving infrastructure in Mexico in return for some water. And critical to this particular presentation, it stipulated that there would be environmental flows to the Delta. And the deal was Mexico would contribute 52,500 acre feet, or million cubic meters, whichever unit you like here. The US contributes an equal amount of water, and the NGOs, the environmental groups, would contribute an equal amount of water over that particular 5-year period of time. The US and Mexico contributed enough water for that spring 2014 pulse flow. And the rest of the water, that water from the NGOs, which they bought or leased from Mexican farmers, was then dribbled out to particular restoration sites. More about that in a few minutes. And where I come in and where a lot of my colleagues come in has to do with a scientific evaluation of those environmental flows. Did they do a job in restoration? Was it successful in some way? The answer is going to be yes, or I wouldn't be here. Okay, but here we are back at the pulse flow and the water gurgling under the dam. It doesn't go over the dam. It actually goes under the dam. And here is a little bit further downstream. Now, one thing you'll note here is this person here is in absolutely no danger whatsoever from the onrushing waters. Okay, you get a little bit further downstream, and what happens is that an awful lot of that water soaked into the ground, infiltrated into the groundwater. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It recharges the groundwater, and a lot of the trees depend upon that groundwater. Now, a little bit of a tour. The NGOs, the environmental groups, were ready. This is a photograph from Sonora Institute's Laguna Grande site. These are photos taken by Dale Turner of the Nature Conservancy, one of the NGOs engaged in this particular effort. And this is just before the arrival of the water. And the thing I want you to see here is that they prepared the ground. They stripped away the tamarisk and salt cedar. They got bare ground, which is really important for the establishment of cottonwoods and willows in this particular spot. So this is not just sort of putting water into the river and expecting good things to happen. This is active management of restoration sites. It's really critical to get the most value out of every drop of water. So before the flow, during the flow, okay, the water arrived. Since April, about less than 2 weeks after the beginning of the pulse flow. Here we are 5 months after the flow, and you can begin to see some of the environmental effects. We've got seedlings growing up where the water wetted the ground and allowed the seedlings to become established. 27 months after the flow, this is really incredible. Give them a little bit of water to these places with a proper care ahead of time. The rate of growth of these cottonwoods and willows is absolutely astounding in this part of the world. Absolutely astounding. Now, also, for a brief period of time, the river connected to the sea. First time in a really, really long time. I'm not exactly sure when. But here, what you're seeing here, this is the Colorado River during the pulse flow on May 15th. This is the incoming tide from the Gulf of California. And right here, the river met the sea for the first time in many, many years. It might also be said that really the sea met the river rather than the other way around, but you get the picture. There was at least a water connection between the Gulf of California and the Colorado River. Symbolically, quite important. In terms of the ecological value or the ecological work done by this connection, probably minimal. But in terms of just the symbolic impact, yeah, here's one of the things that happened. One of the things that happened as a result of this is newspapers picked up on this. And the newspaper headline was, "River reaches the sea." Now, don't you think that would be a normal sort of thing? But rather, of course, in the Colorado situation, that's an unusual sort of thing worthy of a headline. And it did get headlines around the world. Okay, minute by minute, 319 passed. Restoration sites became established. Good progress was made. Now we're operating under the auspices of minute 323. The minute signed, a 9-year minute put into operation in 2017. Similarly, Mexico could store water in the US. US and Mexico share future shortages and surpluses. US pays for water saving infrastructure, gets water in return. And a key element here is that Mexico participates in the drought contingency plan. Okay, that was a real key element in this. Environmental flows would continue to the Delta, but no single pulse flow like you saw in one of those first images. Again, a three-way sharing. Each of the partners in this operation would contribute 77 million acre feet, 70,000 acre feet of water over the term of the minute each, Mexico, US, and the NGOs. Funding for restoration was also agreed upon. Each of the partners allocates $3 million for the restoration work itself, the on-ground landscaping, removal of tamarisk, grading, planting of the trees, watering the trees, sort of care and feeding of the trees, and then funding for monitoring and research. Again, each of the three partners comes up with $3 million. So it's a three-way deal, and it's worked rather remarkably well. Okay, this slide here is going to be too small for you to see, but I've blown up a couple of images of this later on after the next two slides, so don't try to squint and see something that's so difficult. But the point here I'm trying to make is there are three major restoration areas or sites along the riparian zone, along the river as it works its way from the northern international boundary to the Gulf of California. The rest of the NGOs themselves, where they get their water from, as I mentioned, they either purchase or lease water rights from Mexican farmers. That's where they get their water. The interesting thing here is what do you have to do? You have to raise cash to do that sort of thing. And those NGOs, I suspect, and I don't know this because they really won't tell me, most of that cash gets raised on this side of the border, which tells you everything you probably need to know. It's easier to get cash across the border than it is to get water across the border. Okay. But nevertheless, it works. And the two groups that are, these are confederations of environmental groups. They're not environmental groups among themselves, but actually federations of them. And they do a lot of the PR and a lot of the fundraising to make this sort of thing happen. Because remember, they have to raise funds not only for the water, they have to raise funds for the restoration efforts. They have to raise funds, part of the funds, for the scientific monitoring. Okay, this is a close-up of the nearest site. This is a pair of sites. The original site is now almost 10 years old. The Big Alamán site, and just north of it, the new site that is being worked on by Pronatura Noreste, Janitzio site. This is the northern international boundary. We're in here somewhere. This is the city of Mexicali. It's the border, obviously, and one of the landmarks. Oh yeah, San Luis, Arizona, San Luis, Rio, Colorado on the other side. And this area between San Luis and the northern international boundary is the Limitrof. And so there's one of these restoration sites, two now, the restoration sites are along this Limitrof border. boundary between the US and Mexico on the Mexican side. Two other complexes of sites are much further downriver in a part of the river we call Reach 4, where the water table is relatively high, which makes it easier to sustain the vegetation once it gets established. Restaurantes del Colorado is responsible for the Chaussee and a new site at Don Parna. And the Sonora Institute, a binational NGO, one headquarter in Tucson, the other one in Mexicali, is responsible for managing the Laguna Grande complex of sites down here. And this then is, here's the Cienega de Santa Clara down there, if that helps to orient you to these spots. Okay, again, the thing I mentioned before, but it's worth mentioning again and again. These sites are irrigated via the Mexican irrigation system. This is not a situation, these sites are not supported by water that's released down the channel. It goes through the irrigation system, so there are complex working relationships with the irrigation modulums that the individual NGOs have to work out. And there's an irrigation schedule, the water gets delivered pretty much when it's needed by the vegetation. So in a sense, these NGOs are farming nature. Nothing wrong with that. But that's sort of how it's done, and that's how that one works best. So this is some water. The irrigation canal, the main irrigation canal is behind me here, and now it's just flowing into the Chaussee restoration site. The vegetation is planted, actively planted, again, actively managed sites. And the vegetation is raised in these nurseries from seeds and then seedlings, and then taken out into the field and then planted. Planted in the field by hand, surrounded by chicken wire, keep the rabbits and other herbivores from munching down the newly planted vegetation, and provided with a dripper. Goes out to each individual tree. This is an extraordinarily efficient use of water. And I sometimes venture to say that if we all used water in the basin as efficiently as these NGOs are using it in the restoration sites, we probably wouldn't be having the troubles we're having. But these guys have got very little water and they're using it to the maximum efficiency. And this is the Miguel Alemán site in 2019. It's even greener and more extensive now. This is an old meander of the Colorado River. And you can see the bend of the meander here. These are cottonwoods mostly, some willows in here, some open water sites. What do the open water sites do? One of the values of open water sites is they attract birds. So it's not just the trees, it's the birds. And that's one of the big interests people have in restoration. These are mesquite, so they're planting a mesquite bosque. And the reason you sort of see a little coloration around it is they're being watered. Okay. Each individual tree gets its own watering device. They're really extraordinarily efficient use of the water. Okay, as of today, or so far in 2023 at any rate, sort of a breakdown of sort of the size and proportions of these different vegetation types that are being restored along the riparian zone. The largest complex of sites is the one managed by Sonora Institute. This is the Laguna Grande site, 156 hectares of riparian vegetation, a little bit of mesquite bosque, not a little bit, quite a bit, some marsh, and a little bit of upland vegetation. That's just largely Palo Verde. So the farther away you get from the river, the more drought resistant and drought tolerant the vegetation has to be. So far, we now have about 1,400 acres of vegetation planted. Laguna Grande, Miguel Alemán site managed by Proyecto Noreste, and the smallest of the three sites, the Chaussee site, managed by Restaurantes del Colorado. It's not just the trees. It's not just the cottonwoods, the mesquites, the willows, and the Palo Verde. It's the birds. One of the big motivators for this project is to bring back birds to the riparian zone, and it has worked. And one of the reasons why you want to bring them back to the riparian zone of the Delta is that the Delta is squarely along the Pacific Flyway. For migratory birds, it's a stopover point. They can feed, they hang out, and then they move either north or south, depending upon the season of the year you're interested in. So it's birds that are really important to a lot of the NGOs that are involved in this particular effort. Audubon is one of the principal organizations, not surprisingly. Other wildlife. It's not just the birds and the trees, it's other wildlife that shows up. Turtles, bobcats, great family of bobcats, as a matter of fact, in some of the Laguna Grande sites. Coyotes, of course, muskrat, rabbit, and beavers. This is great stuff. Here's a camera trap of a busy beaver hauling away its meal for the day, branch of cottonwood. So you're sort of restoring the whole ecosystem. So it's not just trees and birds, it's sort of the interactions among them that are being restored here as well. We might have to do something on the screen here to get this going, I'm not sure.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, there we go. Okay, this is a camera trap from the Restoremos group. This is a really chubby beaver. Great. And it's busy. You know what's going to happen, right? Right. Looks a little surprised. I wouldn't think that'd be such a surprising thing to a beaver, but nevertheless, there they are. And both Sonoran Institute and Restoremos have these camera traps that are, focusing on beavers and the charismatic mammoth here in this particular setting. And beavers are important not only because they're charismatic, because they're ecosystem engineers. Think about it. What do beavers do? They make dams. What do the dams do? They hold back water. They create habitat for aquatic organisms. That open water attracts birds, and that open water effectively helps infiltrate into the groundwater. So the beavers are really quite important to this, besides they're just being cool. Okay, but it's not just birds, trees, and beavers. It's people. I'm going to spend the rest of my time here really talking largely about people. And it's not just, scientists who go in the field, and here I am standing in the middle of the Colorado River. And it's an opportunity for scientists also to wear great hats as we do our work. But really, the real work, science stuff, is kind of easy. Some of it we do by satellite. We don't even have to leave the office. Doesn't seem fair. But nevertheless, the real work gets done by people in the field, like these crews from the Sonoran Institute, who are out there planting these trees under, frankly, really difficult conditions. And now I want to sort of illustrate some of the people involved here and allow me to take you on a 10-minute field trip to the Colorado River Delta. That didn't work. We need to put the video in there. There we go. Push that. Oh, we might have. Hope we have sound here. Don't.
There should be. Not muted.
Not getting sound? Okay, I will try to narrate this. I mean, I've seen this a lot, but I'm not sure I can sort of do justice to everything that might be said here. There's enough text here that you can get an idea of what's going on. I can sort of skip over this. Here I am, again, on the downstream side. I'm standing in the US in this particular condition.
Anywhere.
You're looking at Morelos Dam. Here we go.
That flow, called the pulse flow, was intended to do was to try to recreate some of the spring flood that happened here before all the dams were constructed on the Colorado River.
We're going to restart it.
Oh, okay.
Where you get the
Let's start. Okay, thank you.
This is the last dam on the Colorado River. From here on, there are no more dams But of course, pretty much from here on, there isn't any more water either.
Looking at a part of the estuary here. We're back to the riparian zone.
5 years ago, here at Morelos Dam, the gates were open for really the first transboundary environmental flow, I think, anywhere. And what that flow, called the pulse flow, was intended to do was to try to recreate some of the spring flood that happened down here before all the dams were constructed on the Colorado River. You could really call it a big landscape scale experiment. We wanted to find out how many trees and other vegetation would spring up. And we wanted to find out, was that enough water to reach the Gulf of California? I lost my bet. I didn't think it would. Other people did, and they won.
I saw the pulse flow in action. It was really excited because my husband had our son in a backpack. The three of us were like trying to find the little stream moving forward. It was by the sunset that we got to be there, and my son was playing at the sand and seeing the water moving, and it was amazing.
Para las comunidades de la región fue una fiesta. Durante el tiempo que duró el flujo pulso, los medios de comunicación locales, la ciudadanía, las redes sociales, no hablaron de otra cosa y sobre todo fue muy bonito que la gente reconociera que el río Colorado forma parte de la identidad de todos los habitantes de esta región.
One-third of the water comes from the NGOs who buy or lease water rights from Mexican farmers. One-third of the water comes from the US side, and one-third of the water comes from the country of Mexico. This is a binational project. And in a time when you think tensions between the US and Mexico would be high, you come to the Delta and people sort of really collaborate with each other from both sides of the border in this project. What we've been doing is some repeat photography where we've reoccupied some sites where photographs were taken of the landscape just before the pulse flow in 2014, just to see how much it changed in the past 5 years.
See a change here.
And also as a record of sort of conditions today, as a way of telling us 5 years from now how much things might have changed.
I think it can be challenging sometimes to find the exact location, especially because we're using GPSs that have some error. Also, there were markers set up, but it's really hard to keep your markers in this area.
En este momento están en el sitio de restauración Miguel Alemán. Toda esta zona era una zona donde era un antiguo meandro del río Colorado. Aquí la gente, los pobladores, venían a esta zona a pescar, después venían también a hacer actividades recreativas con sus familias y bueno, dejó de poner agua por esta zona, por lo tanto toda la vegetación nativa se secó, lo que quedó fue pura arena y pino salado, que es una especie que no es nativa de la región. Muchas de las poblaciones, particularmente de aves y de peces, poblaciones se han reducido y en algunos casos se han extinguido. El esfuerzo de plantación de 2014 a la fecha es aproximado a 100,000 árboles. Y la superficie que se ha restaurado al día de hoy es de 100.5 hectáreas.
The delta is along the Pacific Flyway, a major migratory pathway. So sometimes I say if you're a duck hunter in North Dakota, you should care about the delta because your ducks come through here and they stop here and they bulk up, they feed and they drink, then they fly further on. So it's not just a local issue, it's regional, a pretty large region at that.
Antes del flujo pulso, teníamos una abundancia de 40 especies. Ahorita ya estamos un poquito más de 100. Y esto sucede en casi todos los sitios de restauración.
Es importante también la parte de los beneficios sociales que genera la restauración, porque gran parte de la derrama económica de los esfuerzos que se generan de este trabajo, pues quedan en San Luis Río Colorado y en su valle, y también generamos importantes fuentes de empleo para los pobladores de las comunidades cercanas.
We're at a site called Yanitio, and it's a site that ProNatura plans to use in the future for restoration purposes. What we're looking at here is actually an old meander of the Colorado River that's been completely dried out. And the reason we're here is to sort of record what this place looked like before the restoration activities began. In about 5 years' time, I hope that this is going to look like the Miguel Alemán site that has 5 years of growth of cottonwoods and willows, basically a wall of green in the middle of this dry plain. I started studying the Delta in 1992 when I visited some sites in the Northern Gulf of California. And the students and I were along on that trip just exploring. And we found these beaches that were just made up completely of shells. And one of the most puzzling things we found, or didn't find, I guess, is we couldn't find very many live individuals of the species that we were finding as dead shells. And we couldn't figure that out until we realized the whole environment of the upper Gulf of California had changed. The salinity of the upper Gulf had gone up, and this species liked fresher water than is there now. So I gradually became part of, I'll say, the Delta community. And one of the attractions really of the Delta community is I really like all the people. And I like working with a project of this scale that I would say 20 or certainly 30 years ago, nobody thought was possible.
We are in the middle of Laguna Grande restoration area, and it has more than 700 acres of riparian forest. This is cottonwoods and willows, and it's the densest and largest riparian forest along the river in Mexico. If we look around, all this forest wasn't here 5 years ago. Mexicali, which is the closest city, is a large city, and it's mostly industrial. So kids and people are used to being inside. And when we bring school kids here, even when they just step off the school bus, it's a very big surprise. And we've gotten kids from the normal excitement, like saying, wow, what is this place, to kids crying. We are planting a little seed of curiosity to be in touch with nature again.
When you look at the actual amounts of water that are being delivered here through this agreement, compared to the amounts of water that go to agriculture in the United States or agriculture in Mexico, the cities in the US, the cities in Mexico, this is really a teeny little drop. And that teeny little drop is doing an enormous amount of good. People ask me sort of how much water would it take to restore the Delta? And I have to turn the question around and say, well, how much nature do you want? That's a societal values kind of question. The whole Delta is not going to be restored simply because agriculture is too important. The cities are too important. But I think we can afford enough water to restore a ribbon of green from the border almost to the Gulf.
La restauración es posible si hay capacidad y voluntad de los gobiernos, acompañados de la sociedad civil. Sí es posible poder sentarse a buscar una solución en la cual pueda ser considerado el medio ambiente una parte fundamental.
And thanks to Arizona Public Media for that production. So I just want to conclude with just, highlighting a couple of things here. First of all, restoration is possible. I mean, we've seen it happen. It is happening. But restoring and sustaining those riparian habitats requires ongoing environmental flows. It's not like you can just turn the water off now and everything will take care of itself. No, that's not the case. Maybe less water is needed per unit area now that the vegetation is established, but it still needs ongoing environmental flows. Second point, the point I've made a couple of times already, is that active management is needed. In this particular setting, probably in most settings around the world, nature cannot take care of itself. It needs help. In this particular case, if you want a riparian habitat back, you've got to groom the ground first. You've got to take out the salt cedar. You've got to landscape it to retain the water as much as possible. You need to plant the trees. You need to sustain the trees with drip irrigation. Active management is really the key here to the most efficient use of the water. And it's that efficient use that yields the greatest benefit. And that restoration and continuing flow of water depends on social and policy sustainability. That is, we have to keep people interested in this particular project, keep engaged over the long term. And one of the great things that the NGO groups are now doing in Mexico, and you got a sense of it here in the last one of the last clips in that video, was there's a lot of community outreach. Bringing in kids, bringing in groups, showing people what's done. And then again, of course, this is a source of employment for a lot of people to raise the trees and to plant the trees and sustain them. Minute 323 runs out at the end of 2026. But as you well know, at the end of 2026, an awful lot of other things in the Colorado River Basin run out. Okay, the operating agreements, the interim agreements run out there. So there's going to be a pairing of those operating conditions in the basin and the relationships between the U.S. and Mexico with regard to water sharing of shortages, surpluses, and the environmental commitment. So this doesn't just depend upon science. This really depends upon policy, politics, and social sustainability. Again, so I want to thank all of these groups, without which, none of this would be possible. Without this really extraordinary collaboration, federal agencies on both sides of the border, academic institutions on both sides of the border, and NGO environmental groups on both sides of the border. We're all in this together, and it makes restoration possible. Thank you for your attention.
What do you say? You said you can't restore all of it. So how do you right size that vision? What does that look like?
I think, well, you can't restore all of it. I mean, if you go to the Mexicali Valley, you'll see agricultural fields, not as vast as those in the Imperial Valley, but nevertheless, they take up a lot of what used to be natural habitat in the Delta. That's not going to be restored to what it was before. But I think if you take a look at the riparian zone, where the course of the river used to be, and you pick out spots where the natural water table is already pretty high, that's where the biggest bang for the buck is going to be. It's restoring those riparian zones. If we can get a little bit more of that gallery forest back, that's terrific, because that'll bring the birds back and it engages the people, and it's just terrific.
So this is Brian McNeese. I don't know if can I ask a couple questions?
Hang on.
1 second, Brian. We had somebody in the public raise their hand.
Okay.
If any, as the effect of lack of fresh water going into the Gulf of California had on the Gulf.
Give you a 2-week seminar on that topic. That's how I first got engaged in this particular topic, by noticing that all the empty shells along the shores of the uppermost Gulf of California. I suspect productivity in the upper Gulf has probably been cut by about 90%. And it's been a cascading effect where some organisms that can't tolerate the high salinities that are there now aren't there anymore. So there's been a lack of species as well as a lack of productivity. And it's not just clams, it's probably the crabs that feed on the clams and the snails that feed on the clams, the birds that feed on the snails and the crabs and the clams. You get the picture. So there's been an effect there. We know from Odalvis, ear bones of Totoaba, that before the dams, Totoaba used the mouth of the river as a nursery grounds. The young Totoaba grew in those nursery grounds, and they grew at a faster rate then than they do now. So it affected also the fish in the area. It probably also affected Corvina, although Corvina is still very quite productive, a productive fishery. And I will say, I don't have any evidence to suggest that it affected the vaquita.
Brian, go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to ask, you mentioned that you could reforest, restore the areas where the water table was high, much easier. Where the water table is high, is that water available to be pumped and used for irrigating the restoration efforts?
Yeah, did everybody hear that question? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, mostly the area is part of the riparian zone we call Reach 4. And the reason the water table is high there is because of the irrigation. And an awful lot of the irrigation sort of results in a high water table because we're right next to those agricultural fields. Other reaches or stretches of the river, the water table is very, very low. This is the lower part of the Limitrof and just below San Luis Rio Colorado. There, excessive groundwater pumping for agricultural purposes, some of which is done on the U.S. side, some of which is done on the Mexican side, has lowered the groundwater table to such an extent that it's really difficult to get any natural vegetation back without putting an awful lot of water on the system. So, excuse me. So paradoxically, I guess you could say that the water table is high because of irrigation. And that irrigated water comes largely from Mexico's river allocation that goes through the irrigation system. Yes, you could pump that water, but it would come at a cost. It would come at a cost to those natural habitats.
Thank you.
Any other questions in the room? Somebody just raised their hand. Elston, go ahead.
Hi, I want to thank Dr. Flessa for that excellent presentation. It's been a moment since I've drove down the river south of the Southern International border. I have seen the work in the Limitrof. This is not really a question for him, but just wondering if anyone knows, back earlier this month, due to a combination of Hurricane Hilary and then storms the following weekend, Imperial Dam, the Yuma Sun report was releasing 10,000 CFS. According to USGS gauging stations, 5,000 to 6,000 of that reached Morales Dam. I was wondering, did any of that water flow on down the river channel, or was that all diverted by Mexico into the Alamo Canal?
Not all of it was diverted into the canals. Some of that water did continue down the river itself. We know that from satellite images where we can track the surface water in the river. And it got, I can't remember how many, it didn't get all the way to San Luis, but it did get sort of, at least a third of the way down the Limitrof on that excess flow. We don't have any information about the actual volume that had to go through Morelos Dam into the system and how much was captured for the Mexican irrigation system.
Okay, yeah,
but some of it did make. One of the, sorry, I'm just on a tangent here, but one of the places where there is some natural vegetation is just downstream of Morelos Dam, and it's supported by leakage of the dam, sort of raises the groundwater table there, and it's also supported by these occasional excess flows that are such that there's too much water to even be captured by the Mexican irrigation system, let alone the American one.
Yeah, part of the issue there is the Limitrof is a true sponge. It's hard to get anything past it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
What would happen to the Colorado River? I realize that your expertise is in Mexico, but if you could also project farther north, if we were to have a pulse flow such as we had in 2014 every year. Hypothetical question.
A very hypothetical question indeed. What if we had a pulse flow in the entire system through, if we sort of pretended that Hoover Dam and Glen Canyon Dam weren't there and we would get all the snow melt? You'd wipe out an awful lot of communities along the margins of the river. You'd wipe out an awful lot of infrastructure along the banks of the river. You'd wipe out a lot of the agriculture along the river. The human infrastructure has been built up so much that it probably wouldn't tolerate that sort of flow. Just can't do it. Even for the pulse flow is a challenge. You know, getting 105,000 acre feet down there for that particular period of time really strained the system. I understand it sort of really strained the local habitat here in Yuma, causing some local flooding. And there's times such that it wouldn't interfere with other events that were going on in the Yuma area. So we've really boxed ourselves in terms of sort of trying to sort of recreate the way things used to be. So we have to sort of engineer things in a different way. It used to be the cottonwoods and willows we can naturally establish because the big floods would sort of scour out the riverbed and floodplain, send the seeds downstream, and then the seeds would germinate naturally. Can't do that anymore. What you have to do is you bring in the bulldozers. They'll scour the bed of the river. They'll scour the floodplain. You need then people to sort of plant the trees or to plant the seeds and irrigate them. So we've really, and this is not just in the Colorado River system. This is pretty much everywhere you look in the world, I think. We have to sort of engineer. We have to do ecological engineering to bring back the habitats that we like. The fact that they got there through shall we say, non-natural means, the birds don't care. Beavers don't care. It's the habitat that's the important thing. And we can, and I think this is an example of how we can engineer this sort of these sorts of habitats. We don't have to sort of pretend by turning the clock back and getting rid of all the damage, but it's not going to happen. Even if no. Yes.
So, two questions. One is, you remove the invasive species, how do you manage that on a continuing basis? And then the other question is, with 2026 and 323 expiring and the interim guidelines expiring and all this agreements expiring, what is the post 2026 world look like?
Getting rid of saltpeter is an easy question by comparison. You put people on the ground, which is what the NGOs do. They pull out the saltpeter. Basically you're weeding these sites of saltpeter. That's how you do it, just mechanically. Post 2026, I think there have been enough positive aspects to these restoration efforts by the NGOs and the collaboration across the border. We're going to see a successor minute. What it looks like, I really am not sure, but I think that model of the three-way cooperation is a real winner. And I think we're going to see something there. Post interim guidelines. Oh boy, the Bureau got what, 12,000 comments. People wrote in as to sort of what they thought, what things should look like post 2026. You and I could spend an awful lot of time reading them. You can ask me what I think should happen, but that's another one. That's neither here nor there.
Any other questions from anybody joining us virtually? No.
Thank you, Dr. Plessa. At this time, we're going to open it up for public comment. So if anyone here in the room or online would like to make a public comment, we can take those at this time. And just a reminder for anyone that's on the phone, they may have to push *6 to unmute themselves.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, my public comment is, I am one of those 12,000 people who sent in comments to the Bureau of Reclamation. And as part of those comments, I expressed a difficulty in assessing, they were scoping comments, so we're not really looking at any particular alternatives at this point. But it's more difficult to comment when you don't know what's going on the Mexican side of the situation. And I was just wondering if we could have maybe greater or more public cooperation and information exchange and public involvement in collaboration between IBWC and Reclamation, so that we're looking at the river as a whole and not dividing it up by what is an important legal political boundary, but nonetheless, which can be to the detriment of the whole ecosystem. Thank you.
Nothing in the chat.
Okay, anyone online, if you do want to make a public comment, you can just raise your hand. And we'll accept those. We're going to kind of move on to board discussion, but if we see a hand raised, we'll obviously take that, given that we're trying to kind of manage both in the room and online. So in terms of board discussion, I think we can sort of merge this together with the last item on the agenda, but if any of our board members would like to make a comment or suggest a future agenda item, then we would take those at this time. And I'll note that our next meeting is January 17th from 4 to 6, and that will be a hybrid and in-person meeting. Anna, would we be in? We'd be in El Centro, probably. Do we know?
Probably.
Yeah, so that one will likely be in the El Centro Imperial area, depending on where the location is. But opening it up to board discussion and any future agenda items.
Excuse me, Megan, what was the date again of the next meeting?
January 17th.
Thank you.
Well, this is Brian McNeese. I have actually a question for Dr. Plessa again, and comment is the same. By the way, I'm on the phone, and the phone for some reason cuts out every 30 minutes, so I have to recall. I call in again. So I've asked several times to see if we could get some information on an update of the health of La Ciénaga de Santa Clara, and maybe actually Dr. Plessa may be able to comment on that, and if not, maybe schedule that for another meeting.
Yeah, the question is about update on the status of the Ciénaga de Santa Clara. I confess I've really not tracked that very, very closely. The information I'm most aware of with regard to the Ciénaga is that a few years ago, the abundance of clapper rail went way down for some reason. It's not clear why, but they're now recovering. So that's the most recent information I have that I know about the Ciénaga. Sorry, I don't know anymore.
Well, thanks for your answer, and that was a terrific presentation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Future agenda items. Anyone else online or in the room for board members that want to propose a future agenda item? I know we have an ongoing list as well. And so before the next meeting, we can recirculate that to the board for any additions or kind of preferences on which one of those we go with. And I think obviously at any time, the board can send those topics in to IBWC to get those on the running list. Oh, yes, and then just another reminder to the board, the field trip is planned for October 25th from 10 to 4. From 10 to 4, and so if you have not responded to Anna, then please respond and let her know whether or not you can make it. I am one of those people, so I will make sure that I respond. But any of my other board members, if you could make sure you get Anna a response here pretty quick. And if there's no other comments from the board or in the room, then we will go ahead. Oh, one more.
I'd just like to suggest a meeting topic. I have to confess, I haven't been attending all the meetings, so I don't know if you've already looked into this. But I'd be interested in hearing about new models for modeling the Colorado River. Naturally, Reclamation has the models that they use, but they're quite limited in what they do. And I understand that at Utah State University, they've been putting out a number of papers that involve more expanded modeling, looking at more variables, and perhaps hearing from them would be interesting. I don't have any specific names. There are a whole number of scientists who are involved in this effort. Certainly Brad Udall is one of them, although he's at Colorado State, not Utah State, but works through this center, Utah State. Thank you.
So this might or might not be appropriate for the next meeting, and it's entirely self-serving. But in 2020, we were able to secure from the Water Resources Development Act a new start feasibility study for the Salton Sea, which we got funded through the Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act, and we actually signed the agreement, began work in December of last year. It's going to be an extensive process, so it might not be a rush to get something like that done, but it would be very interesting once that gets underway in earnest to perhaps invite the Corps and CNRA and DWR when we're probably in the Imperial Valley. Put that on the calendar and just have to talk about it, because it is the Imperial streams. So what they're at least contemplating looking at is all of the inflows to the sea, as well as the sea proper for ecosystem restoration.
Okay, anyone else online? Don't see any hands raised on our end.
I'll make one minor comment at the end before you adjourn.
Okay. Okay, and seeing none, I'm going to hand it back over to Leslie.
Just a quick note to everybody. The Colorado Rivers Board that's currently seated, the last meeting for your all's term is January of 2024. So that meeting will be the last meeting with the current sitting board, and then we'll open the application period for anybody that's interested in applying for the next 2-year term. Just some quick notes. We are keeping the 3 times a year hybrid format. 3 meetings a year, sorry.
3 meetings a year?
Yes.
3 a year.
Yes, no, back to 2-year terms. Back to 2-year terms. So 3 meetings per year, back to a 2-year term, and they are going to stay hybrid meetings at the request of the majority of the boards and the participants who attend the meetings. So if you are interested in reapplying, or if you know somebody who might be interested in applying, we will announce at the next meeting when that application period will end, and then I try to have applications on hand so that I can hand them out as well. So I just wanted to let you all know that. So that will be on the agenda also for the next meeting. I'll hand it back to Ms. Scott.
Great. So I just want to thank everybody for attending that's here in the room and online. And we will go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.